Rebecca Sterling was having the worst day of her life, and it wasn't even noon yet. The CEO of Sterling Industries sat behind the wheel of her black luxury sedan, watching steam pour out from under the hood like an angry dragon. She'd been driving for 3 hours straight, rushing to the most important business meeting of her career, when her car decided to give up on life right in the middle of nowhere. Perfect. Just perfect, she muttered, stepping out onto the dusty road. Her designer heels clicked against the asphalt as she walked around the car, as if staring at it harder would somehow make it work again. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and she could already feel sweat forming under her perfectly tailored business suit. She pulled out her phone, hoping for a miracle. No signal. Of course there wasn't. She was in the kind of place where cell towers were probably considered fancy technology. Rolling hills stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with farmhouses and not much else. This wasn't the world Rebecca knew, a world of skyscrapers, five-star restaurants, and people who jumped when she snapped her fingers. The merger meeting with Davidson Corp was supposed to start in 2 hours, and it was still a 90-minute drive away. This deal wasn't just important, it was everything. Her company was struggling, and this partnership could save the jobs of over 300 employees. The board was already questioning her leadership after 2 failed quarters. If she missed this meeting, she might as well pack up her corner office. Rebecca spotted a weathered sign about a mile down the road. Tony's Auto Repair, it read, with an arrow pointing left. She had no choice. Grabbing her briefcase and locking the car, she started walking, her heels making the journey uncomfortable with every step. The repair shop looked like it had been there since the 1950s. Paint peeled from the walls and old tires were stacked in neat piles around the yard. A German shepherd lounged in the shade, barely lifting his head to acknowledge her arrival. This place was the complete opposite of everything in Rebecca's world. Messy, simple, and completely unpretentious. She pushed open the screen door, which announced her arrival with a rusty squeak. Inside, she found a man in his early 30s bent over an engine, completely focused on his work. His name tag read Tony, and his work shirt had seen better days. When he looked up, she noticed he had kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed genuine, something Rebecca wasn't used to in her corporate world. "Good morning, ma'am. What can I do for you today?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders, switching into CEO mode. "My car broke down about a mile from here. It's a 2023 luxury sedan, and I need it fixed immediately. I have an extremely important meeting in 2 hours." Tony wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "Let me grab my truck and we'll take a look." During the short drive back to her car, Rebecca found herself stealing glances at Tony. There was something different about him, a calmness that she rarely encountered in her high-stress world. While she checked her watch every 30 seconds, he seemed completely at peace with the pace of small-town life. When they reached her car, Tony popped the hood and whistled low. "Well, there's your problem. Your coolant system's completely shot, and it looks like your engine's been running hot for a while. When's the last time you had this serviced?" Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, and it wasn't from the sun. I don't know. Someone handles that for me." Tony nodded without judgment, though she caught a flicker of something in his expression. "The good news is it's fixable. The bad news is I'll need to order some parts. These luxury imports use specialized components that I don't keep in stock. Might take a few days to get everything in." "A few days?" Rebecca's voice pitched higher. "No, you don't understand. I need this fixed now, today, this hour. Money is no object. I'll pay whatever it takes." "Ma'am, I understand you're in a hurry, but some things just can't be rushed. Quality work takes time. Rebecca began pacing beside the car, her mind racing through possibilities. She could call a cab, but they were hours from any major city. She could rent a car, but where? The nearest rental place was probably 100 miles away. Her assistant was trying to reach her, but without phone signal, she was completely cut off from her world. "Look," she said, turning back to Tony with desperation creeping into her voice. "I run a company that employs hundreds of people. If I miss this meeting, those people might lose their jobs. There has to be something you can do." Tony studied her for a moment, then looked back at the engine. "Well, there might be one thing. It's not pretty, and it's definitely not permanent. But I could rig up a temporary fix that might get you where you need to go. No guarantees, though." "Yes, do it. Whatever it takes." "It'll take me about 4 hours of straight work, and like I said, no promises. This engine is pretty complicated." Rebecca looked at her watch again. 4 hours would make her impossibly late, but it was better than not showing up at all. She could call from town and reschedule for tomorrow morning. It wasn't ideal, but it might work. As Tony began gathering tools from his truck, Rebecca found herself really looking at the repair shop for the first time. Despite its humble appearance, everything was organized and clean. The tools were well maintained, and she noticed certificates on the wall, automotive training programs, small business awards, and a military service commendation. "You were in the military?" she asked, trying to make conversation while he worked. "Army. Did 2 tours overseas before coming back home to run this place when my dad retired." Rebecca watched as Tony began disassembling parts of her engine with the precision of a surgeon. His hands moved with confidence, and she realized he knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't some small-town mechanic fumbling around. This was a skilled craftsman who understood complex machinery. As the hours passed, Rebecca's frustration grew. She wasn't used to being powerless, to having to wait for someone else to solve her problems. In her world, everything moved at lightning speed. Meetings happened via video call, problems were solved with phone calls, and money could fix almost anything instantly. But here she was, sitting on a folding chair in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old coffee, watching a man she'd never met before work on her car with tools that looked like they belonged in a museum. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who made million-dollar decisions was completely dependent on someone she would normally never interact with. By late afternoon, Tony was still working. Rebecca had managed to find a weak phone signal and rescheduled her meeting for the next morning, though she could hear the disappointment in her assistant's voice. The Davidson Corp executives weren't thrilled about the delay either. As Tony worked, she found herself studying him more closely. Despite the complexity of the job, he never seemed frustrated or overwhelmed. He approached each problem methodically, sometimes stopping to think through a solution before proceeding. It was the kind of patient, thoughtful approach that Rebecca had trained herself out of years ago in favor of quick decisions and faster results. The sun was setting when Tony finally emerged from under the hood, covered in grease and sweat. "Well, it's not pretty, but I think she'll run." Rebecca held her breath as he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then settled into a steady rhythm. It wasn't the smooth purr she was used to, but it was running. "This should get you to town and probably to your meeting tomorrow, but you'll need to get those parts ordered as soon as possible." "This is just a Band-Aid." Rebecca stared at the engine in amazement. Hours ago, it had been completely dead. Now, through sheer skill and determination, Tony had brought it back to life using nothing but basic tools and creativity. I can't believe you actually did it," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. Tony smiled that same warm smile. Sometimes the old ways work just fine. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she realized she owed this man more than just money. He'd saved her company, her job, and possibly the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. Yet she'd spent the entire day treating him like he was beneath her. Standing there in the gathering dusk, watching Tony clean his tools with the same care he'd shown her engine, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine humility. This humble mechanic had accomplished something that all her money and corporate power couldn't have achieved. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Really? Thank you." Tony nodded. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Drive safe now." As Rebecca drove away, her car running better than it had in months, she couldn't stop thinking about the man she'd just met. In one afternoon, he'd challenged everything she thought she knew about success, skill, and what really mattered in life. Rebecca returned the next day, just as she'd promised, and the day after that, and the day after that. What started as checking on her car became something much more meaningful. She found herself looking forward to the drive from the city, leaving, behind the stress and noise, for the quiet peace of Tony's garage. At first, she tried to justify these visits. The car needed monitoring, she told herself. Tony had said the fix was temporary, so it made sense to keep an eye on things. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was coming back because of Tony himself. Each visit revealed new layers to the man she'd initially dismissed. She watched him work on other customers' cars with the same careful attention he'd given hers. Mrs. Patterson's old Ford that needed to last until her Social Security check came in. The Martinez family's minivan that had to run safely with 4 kids depending on it. A teenager's first car that meant everything to a young man trying to get to his after-school job. Tony treated every repair like it mattered, because to these people, it did. Rebecca began to understand that this wasn't just a business to him, it was a lifeline for the entire community. "You know," Tony said one afternoon as they shared coffee on his lunch break, "you don't have to keep checking on that car. The fix is holding up just fine." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I know. I guess I like it here. It's peaceful." "Your world must be pretty crazy if you find a mechanic's garage peaceful. You have no idea." Rebecca laughed, but there was truth behind it. "Some days I feel like I'm drowning in meetings and phone calls and people wanting things from me. Coming here feels like I can finally breathe." Tony studied her face. "What's really going on, Rebecca? I mean, I'm glad you're here, but this can't be normal for you." She was quiet for a long moment, watching him work on a carburetor with steady, patient hands. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" "Of course. I'm tired. Bone deep, soul tired. I've spent so many years climbing ladders and fighting battles that I forgot why I started climbing in the first place." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I watch you work, when I see how much you care about helping people, it reminds me of who I used to want to be." Tony set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "Who did you used to want to be?" "Someone who mattered. Someone who made a difference. I thought running a big company would do that, but most days I feel like I'm just moving money around and making rich people richer. But you said the merger saved hundreds of jobs." "It did, and that felt good, really good. But it was also the first time in years that I did something that actually helped regular people instead of just shareholders." They talked until the sun started setting. Tony told her about his dreams of maybe expanding the shop someday, turning it into a training center where young people could learn valuable skills. Rebecca found herself sketching out business plans on the back of repair invoices. Her excitement growing as they talked. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "I've sat through 1,000 boring meetings about market expansion and profit margins, but I've never been more interested in a business plan than I am right now. Maybe because this one's about helping people instead of just making money." Rebecca nodded. Maybe that's exactly what it is. As weeks passed, Rebecca's visits became routine. She'd drive out in the evenings after work, sometimes bringing dinner from the city, sometimes eating at the diner with Tony. She met more of the townspeople, learned their stories, and began to understand why Tony had chosen to stay. But her frequent absences weren't going unnoticed. Her assistant, Janet, finally confronted her. "Rebecca, the board is asking questions. You've missed 3 important dinner meetings this month, and you're leaving the office early almost every day. What's going on?" Rebecca looked up from her desk, where she'd been daydreaming about Tony's smile. "I'm handling my responsibilities, Janet. Everything important gets done." "That's not the point. Your behavior has changed, and people are talking. Some of the board members think you're losing focus." That night, Rebecca stared at herself in her bathroom mirror. Janet was right. She was changing, but she wasn't sure. It was a bad thing. For the first time in years, she was happy. Really, genuinely happy. The question was whether she could have both worlds, her successful career and whatever was growing between her and Tony. The next evening, she arrived at Tony's shop to find him teaching a group of teenagers how to change oil. 3 boys and 2 girls, all around 16, hung on his every word as he explained the importance of regular maintenance. "Miss Rebecca," called out Jamie, one of the girls she'd met before. "Tony's teaching us how to fix cars so we can help our families and maybe even start our own business someday." Rebecca watched Tony patiently guide a nervous boy through his first oil change, encouraging him when he fumbled with the tools, celebrating with him when he got it right. This was teaching in its purest form, not because he had to, but because he wanted to pass on knowledge that could change these kids' lives. After the teenagers left, Rebecca helped Tony clean up the shop. It had become their routine, working side by side in comfortable silence, occasionally bumping shoulders or sharing a smile over some small task. "You're amazing with those kids," she said as they put away the last of the tools. "They remind me of myself at that age. Hungry to learn, wanting to make something of themselves. If I can give them a skill that'll help them earn a living, why wouldn't I?" Not everyone would take the time. Maybe not in your world, but here we look out for each other. Rebecca felt a pang at his words. My world. When had it become separate from his? And more importantly, which world did she want to live in? That weekend, Tony's father had a minor heart episode. Nothing serious, the doctors said, but it was a reminder that he wasn't getting any younger. Rebecca found Tony at the hospital, sitting in the waiting room with his head in his hands. "Hey," she said softly, taking the seat beside him. "How is he?" "He's okay. Stable. But the doctor says he needs to take it easier, reduce stress." Tony looked up at her with tired eyes. "He wants to know when I'm going to give him grandchildren and settle down." Rebecca felt her heart skip. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm working on it." Tony's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Rebecca, these past few weeks, spending time with you. It's been the best part of my days. Tony, I know we're from different worlds. I know you have a life in the city that I can't compete with. But I care about you. More than I probably should. Rebecca reached for his hand. You're not competing with anything. You're the most genuine person I've ever met. You make me want to be better. So what do we do about it? Before Rebecca could answer, her phone rang. It was Janet calling about an emergency board meeting, a hostile takeover attempt requiring her immediate attention. The real world was calling, demanding she choose. She looked at Tony, then at her phone, then back at Tony. For the first time in her career, she sent the call to voicemail. We figure it out, she said. Together. Tony squeezed her hand. You sure about that? I'm just a small-town mechanic. And I'm just a woman who's been looking for something real her whole life without knowing it. She smiled. Besides, you fixed my car when everyone said it was impossible. I'm starting to think you can fix anything. As they sat together in that hospital waiting room, Rebecca realized something important. She'd been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that she'd forgotten to build a life worth living. Tony had shown her what that looked like. A life built on relationships, community, and doing work that mattered. The question now was whether she had the courage to choose it, even if it meant walking away from everything she'd worked so hard to build. But looking at Tony, seeing the hope and love in his eyes, Rebecca knew that some risks were worth taking. After all, the best things in life usually came from the most unexpected places, like a small-town garage where a humble mechanic had managed to fix much more than just her car. The emergency board meeting Rebecca had ignored turned out to be bigger than she'd imagined. When she walked into her office Monday morning, 3 board members were waiting for her, their faces stern and unwelcoming. Rebecca, we need to talk, said Charles Morrison, the chairman of the board. Your recent behavior has become concerning. She sat down slowly, already knowing where this conversation was headed. What behavior would that be, Charles? Missing meetings, leaving early, and frankly, you seem distracted. The Davidson merger was successful, yes, but that doesn't give you license to check out of your responsibilities. Rebecca looked around the conference table at these men in expensive suits who'd never worried about whether their car would start in the morning or if they could afford to fix it when it didn't. I've been handling all my responsibilities. The company is doing better than it has in years. That's not the point, interrupted board member Richard Hayes. Leadership is about presence, commitment, and focus. Whatever's going on in your personal life needs to take a back seat to your professional obligations. For a moment, Rebecca felt the old anger rising. These men were questioning her dedication after everything she'd done for the company. But then, she thought about Tony, about the way he'd looked at her in the hospital waiting room, about the teenagers learning valuable skills in his garage, and the anger faded into something else entirely. You know what? She said quietly. You're right. My focus has changed. I've been spending time in a community where people actually care about each other, where work means helping others instead of just making money. And it's made me realize something important about what this company could be. The board members exchanged concerned glances. Charles leaned forward. Rebecca, I think you need to take some time off. Clear your head. Remember what's important. I know exactly what's important now. That's the problem. That afternoon, Rebecca drove to Tony's shop with her mind spinning. She found him working on Mrs. Patterson's Ford again, the same one from months ago that somehow kept running despite its age. How does she afford to keep fixing this thing? Rebecca asked, watching Tony carefully adjust something under the hood. She doesn't. Most of the work I do for her is free. Same with a lot of folks around here. Tony wiped his hands and looked at her. You look upset. What happened? Rebecca told him about the board meeting, about the pressure to choose between her career and whatever they were building together. Tony listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. So what are you going to do? He asked when she finished. I don't know. If I keep coming here, keep changing, they'll eventually force me out. But if I go back to being who I was before, I'll lose this. Us. Tony was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca, I can't ask you to give up everything you've worked for. That wouldn't be fair. But what if I want to? What if I've realized that what I've been working for isn't what I actually want? Before Tony could answer, his phone rang. It was the hospital. His father had taken a turn for the worse and needed surgery immediately. They rushed to the medical center, where Rebecca sat beside Tony in another waiting room, this time facing something much more serious. He's all I have left, Tony said quietly. After Mom died, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything I know about cars, about business, about being a good man. Rebecca took his hand. He's going to be okay. Your dad's a fighter. Is he? He's 73, Rebecca. He's been carrying the weight of that shop, of taking care of everyone in town who needs help for 40 years. Maybe it's time I carried more of that weight. The surgery took 6 hours. When the doctor finally came out, he had good news. Tony's father would recover, but he needed to retire completely. No more physical work, no more stress. As they walked into the recovery room, Rebecca saw Tony's father for the first time since this whole journey began. He was awake but weak, and his eyes lit up when he saw his son. Dad, this is Rebecca, Tony said. The one I told you about. The older man's eyes shifted to Rebecca, studying her with the same intelligent gaze she'd come to know in his son. You're the CEO who's been stealing my boy's attention. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. I haven't seen Tony this happy since before his mother passed. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Over the next few days, Rebecca found herself spending more time at the hospital and the shop than at her office. She helped Tony manage appointments, learned to answer phones, and even figured out how to process payments. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt more meaningful than most board meetings she'd attended. Janet called repeatedly, warning her that the board was planning another meeting, this time to discuss her future with the company. Rebecca listened to these messages while sitting in Tony's office, surrounded by the organized chaos of invoices, parts catalogs, and thank you notes from customers. You know, she said to Tony one evening as they closed up the shop, I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about turning this place into a training center. Yeah? What about it? What if we actually did it? What if we expanded, brought in real educational programs, maybe even partnered with the community college? Tony stopped stacking tire rims and looked at her. That would take money, Rebecca. More money than I'll ever have. But I have money. Or at least, I have access to investors who might be interested in a project like this. Rebecca's excitement was building as she talked. Think about it. A technical training center that actually serves working families, that teaches real skills people can use to build better lives. You're serious about this. Dead serious. I've been thinking about it for weeks. This community, these people, they deserve better opportunities, and you're the perfect person to provide them. Tony sat down on a workbench, studying her face. What about your company? Your career? Rebecca took a deep breath. I've been the CEO of Sterling Industries for 8 years. I've made a lot of money and climbed as high as I can climb. But in all that time, I've never felt as useful, as happy, as I have these past few months helping you. So what are you saying? I'm saying that months ago I made you a promise. I said if you could fix my car, I'd marry you. I was being sarcastic and rude, but you know what? You did fix my car. And somehow you fixed me too. Tony stood up, moving closer to her. Rebecca, I'm saying I want to keep that promise. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I love you, Tony. I love your kindness, your integrity, your commitment to helping others. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be better. Tony cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. Are you sure? Really sure? Because once you step off that corporate ladder, it's hard to climb back up. I don't want to climb back up. I want to build something different, something better. With you. He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and full of promise. When they broke apart, Tony was smiling. So, he said, I guess this means you're really going to marry me? If you'll have me. A reformed CEO with big dreams and absolutely no idea how to change a tire. I can teach you to change a tire. The rest we'll figure out together. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the town's small church, wearing a simple white dress that cost less than her old power suits. The entire community had turned out for the wedding, filling the pews with faces that had become familiar and dear. As she walked down the aisle, she passed Mrs. Patterson, who gave her a thumbs up. Jamie and the other teenagers Tony had taught were there, beaming with pride. Even some of her old colleagues had made the trip, looking bewildered but supportive. Tony waited at the altar in his best suit, the same warm smile on his face that had first made her heart skip months ago. Behind him stood his father, recovered and proud, ready to give his blessing to the union. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When the minister asked if she took Tony to be her husband, Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought them here. A broken-down car, a humble mechanic, and a promise made in frustration that had become something beautiful. I do, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. After the wedding, they drove away in her old car, the same one Tony had fixed that first day. It was running perfectly now, with genuine parts and expert maintenance. Like their relationship, it had gone from a temporary fix to something built to last. Their first project together was expanding the garage into the training center they'd dreamed about. Using Rebecca's business connections and Tony's technical expertise, they created something that served both the community's needs and their shared vision of making a real difference. As they worked side by side, planning and building and teaching, Rebecca often thought about that desperate day when her car had broken down. She'd been so focused on getting to her meeting that she'd almost missed the most important appointment of her life, the one with the man who would become her partner in every sense of the word. Sometimes the best journeys begin with a breakdown, she realized. Sometimes you have to get completely lost before you can find your way home. Rebecca barely slept that night. She'd checked into the only motel in town, a small place with faded wallpaper and a bed that creaked every time she moved. But it wasn't the unfamiliar surroundings keeping her awake. It was the memory of Tony's calm confidence as he worked on her car. She'd met countless experts in boardrooms, people with fancy degrees and expensive suits. but none of them had impressed her quite like the mechanic who'd saved her day with nothing but skill and determination. The next morning, she drove carefully to her rescheduled meeting, listening nervously to every sound the engine made. To her amazement, the car ran smoothly all the way to the city. The temporary fix that Tony had called not pretty was working perfectly. The meeting with Davidson Corp went better than she'd ever hoped. The executives were impressed with her presentation, and by noon, they'd agreed to the merger that would save her company. Rebecca should have been celebrating, but all she could think about was getting back to that little repair shop to thank the man who'd made it all possible. She drove straight back, arriving at Tony's shop just as he was closing. Up for lunch. He looked surprised to see her. "How'd the meeting go?" he asked, wiping his hands on the same old rag from yesterday. "It went perfectly. The car ran like a dream. I can't thank you enough." Tony smiled. "Glad to hear it. But remember, you still need those permanent parts. This fix won't last forever." "About that," Rebecca said, reaching for her purse. "What do I owe you? And please don't lowball me. What you did yesterday was worth more than money." Tony named a price that was so low Rebecca almost laughed. In her world, people charged 10 times that amount just to look at a problem. "That's it? Tony, you saved my entire company yesterday. Let me pay you what this was really worth." "Ma'am, I charged you a fair price for fair work. I don't take advantage of people just because they're in a tough spot." Rebecca stared at him, genuinely confused. Every service provider she'd ever dealt with had inflated their prices the moment they sensed desperation or wealth. Yet here was a man who could have charged her anything and chose not to. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you stay up all night working on my car? You could have just said no." Tony leaned against the workbench, considering the question. "You said people might lose their jobs if you missed that meeting. That's not something you ignore, even for a stranger. But you don't even know me. For all you knew, I could have been lying." "Maybe. But I've learned that when someone's truly desperate, you help if you can. It's just the right thing to do." Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. When was the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return? In her world, every favor came with strings attached. Every kindness had a price. "Tony, can I buy you lunch? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." They walked to the small diner across the street, a place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1960s. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and a menu written on a chalkboard behind the counter. Rebecca felt completely out of place in her business suit, but Tony seemed right at home. Over burgers and coffee, Rebecca found herself telling Tony about her company, the pressure she was under, and how close she'd come to losing everything. He listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood business better than she'd expected. "So what's your background?" she asked. "I saw military certificates on your wall yesterday." Tony nodded. "I served 8 years in the Army, worked on helicopters and tanks, learned everything I could about engines and machinery. When I got out, I had plans to go to engineering school, maybe work for one of the big auto companies. What happened?" "Life happened? My dad had a heart attack right when I was about to start college. Someone needed to run the shop and take care of him. My mom had passed when I was younger, so it was just us." Tony stirred his coffee slowly. "I figured I could always go back to school later, but Dad needed me then. Do you regret it? Giving up your plans?" Tony was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been. But this town needed the shop, and Dad needed me. Plus, I've learned things here that no classroom could have taught me. Rebecca found herself studying Tony's face as he talked. There was no bitterness in his voice, no resentment about the opportunities he'd given up. He spoke about sacrifice like it was just another Tuesday, the way she might talk about a routine business decision. "What about you?" Tony asked. "Always wanted to run a big company?" Rebecca laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Honestly, I never planned for any of this. I started at Sterling Industries right out of college, working in their marketing department. I was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. I pushed hard, worked crazy hours, stepped on anyone who got in my way." "That doesn't sound like the person I met yesterday." "What do you mean?" "The woman I met was worried about her employees losing their jobs. That's not someone who only cares about herself." Rebecca felt a strange warmth at his words. "I guess I've changed over the years. When you're responsible for hundreds of people's livelihoods, it puts things in perspective." They talked for 2 hours. Rebecca learned that Tony volunteered with the local youth program, teaching kids basic mechanics and life skills. He'd helped half the town with their cars at one point or another, often for free when families were struggling. The elderly lady who ran the diner told Rebecca that Tony had fixed her walk-in cooler 3 times without ever sending a bill. "He's the heart of this community," she said, when Tony stepped outside to take a phone call. "Don't know what we'd do without him." Rebecca was beginning to understand why. In a world where everyone seemed to have an angle, Tony was refreshingly genuine. He helped people because it was right, not because of what he might get in return. When they walked back to the shop, Rebecca found herself reluctant to leave. She'd planned to drive back to the city that afternoon, but something was keeping her here. "Tony, I have a confession to make," she said as they stood beside her car. "Yesterday when I was frustrated and you were working on my engine, I said something stupid. I said if you could fix my car, I'd marry you. I was being sarcastic and rude, and I'm sorry." Tony chuckled. "I remember. You were having a rough day. The thing is, I've been thinking about it. Not the marriage part," she added quickly, feeling her cheeks heat up. "But about what you did. You took an impossible job and made it work through. Pure skill and determination. In my world, people make excuses and pass the buck. You just fixed the problem. Sometimes that's all you can do." Rebecca looked at this man who'd turned her world upside down in just 2 days. Everything about him challenged what she thought she knew about success and worth. He didn't have money or power or a fancy title, but he had something she'd been missing in her life: integrity. "Would you mind if I came back tomorrow?" she asked. "To check on the car, I mean. Make sure everything's still running smoothly." Tony smiled. "Sure, but I should warn you. There's not much excitement around here. Might be pretty boring for someone used to the big city." "Maybe boring is exactly what I need." As Rebecca drove back to her hotel, she realized something had changed in her. The urgency that usually drove every moment of her day was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, or the next crisis to solve. She was thinking about a man in work clothes who'd stayed up all night to help a stranger, who'd given up his dreams to take care of his father, and who'd made her car run better than it had in months using nothing but old tools and new ideas. Her phone buzzed with messages from her assistant, meetings to reschedule, calls to return, decisions that needed her immediate attention. Rebecca looked at the phone, then at the peaceful countryside rolling past her window. For once in her life, the rest of the world could wait. She had something more important to figure out. Like why a small-town mechanic had managed to fix more than just her car. He'd somehow started fixing something in her heart that she hadn't even realized was broken. The temporary fix on her engine was working perfectly, but Rebecca was beginning to suspect that what was happening between her and Tony might turn out to be permanent after all.